Good afternoon. We are running quite late because of the rains, but so I'll try to not to waste a lot of time and get straight into the topic of the day. In 2017 January, I uninstalled my cable television, and since then I have only watched digital content. So, whether it's Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hotstar, or anything else, it has always been viewed on the internet. And increasingly, in the past 2.5 years, digital content has become so much mainstream that we never thought that something like this will happen in a country like India, where entertainment has its own dimensions, right? But let me start with you, Aparna. You are part of Amazon, and Amazon has its huge curated labels as well as its own labels. Is the current generation very different from what it was, say, 1.5 decade ago? And do they want different kind of content, and are they as discerning in their content viewing as they are in the life choices?
So, I think this is. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think this is truly the renaissance of Indian entertainment. There's a. Better. I think we are truly at. This is truly the renaissance of Indian entertainment. We are at the cusp of a creative explosion, and the appetite that there exists for great content, diverse stories, newer themes. It's never been there before. Um, is the audience different? Definitely. This is a more aware audience. You know, the themes are changing, people are changing, social trends are changing, and I think entertainment needs to keep pace with that change. Yeah, so the entertainment is changing and the audience is changing.
And how much of your content is created keeping in mind the changing consumer behavior or the changing viewer behavior? Do you look at it from that lens?
All our entertainment choices are made consumer backwards. So we really try to see what is the consumer gap that we are trying to fill. I mean, there exists a world of cinema and that there exists a world of satellite content. But there is a very fertile space that exists in between the two. And this is the space that we want to capture, where you can tell great stories, where you can have characters that are not necessarily black and white, but, are gray. Where there are characters who can talk about what they feel, they think, and they believe in. So, yeah, all our choices are driven from the consumer need.
Right, right. Uday, if I could quickly come to you, because on Sony Live there is a lot of content which is already there on television. Do you think that there is these two, the television and the internet, are merging at a certain level? Is that the reason why you have a lot of television content on your platform?
So I think what we've seen is that going back to your earlier question, has the audience changed? I don't think the audience has fundamentally changed. I think one of the key things that has happened is the screens have become another option in front of the user. So while you had one screen in front of the user a few years back, and you had the option of either watching it on the theater screen, or you had the option of watching it on a television screen. I think what has happened is, with the mobile being so available with everybody, and you're carrying it 24/7 in your pocket, I think there's a huge alternative screen that has appeared. If that screen has appeared in front of the user, he's watching what he wants to watch. Whether it is television content, whether it is movie content, whether it is original content, whether it's sports. I think the consumer is looking for what is engaging. The consumer is looking what he likes, irrespective of the screen in front of the screen. So if the screen is available for him while he is in the train, and it's the mobile screen, I think he'll consume whatever he likes the most at that point in time. I don't think the consumer judges it from a point saying this is television content or this is not television content, or this is something which was made for only digital audiences versus being made for television audiences. I think those differentiates, those pieces, consumer doesn't really look at that sharply.
Right. But it's also because of that screen, because of the medium on which entertainment is consumed, that is going through this change. So isn't entertainment more personal than ever before?
Absolutely.
And because at one time, at least when it was television content, people always knew that the television would sit in the living room and the family would be hovering around that place. So the content has to be viewed or created in a certain way which would not upset the family. So
I think there are users. I understand the drift of your question. I understand what you're saying. So there is a choice for the consumer today, and whether it is on Sony Live, whether it is Hotstar or Amazon or wherever, there is a choice for the user on all platforms to see content which they're comfortable in a family environment to see. There is also a choice to watch on Sony Live, Hotstar or Amazon or other platforms to watch something which they should watch in their personal space. So I think that differentiation is available, and that's the space that Aparna is talking of. There is a space which is available for television content. There is a space available for movies. There's a space available for sports. So let's look at sports as an example. It's a great space. Which was a huge television viewership, and now it's probably leading digital consumption. I don't think the differentiation of personal consumption versus non-personal consumption comes into it. It's a great engaging content, and fundamentally, if your content is good, people will watch it irrespective of the screen. Yes, some qualification comes in if you're watching it with the family versus not watching it with the family, but I think those barriers over a period of time will also come down.
Right. Vibha, we were discussing this off stage that a lot of titles which people would not pick up in a traditional era that are being picked up, and you yourself have backed certain titles which were not getting enough takers in the market. So has this era opened up opportunity for a lot of creators whose content would otherwise go unconsumed in the world? And does that mean that we can see a surge of new or differentiated content creation happening in the years to come?
I definitely think. I definitely think that there was always, content primarily was judged by whether it's going to do well or not, and whether people will watch it. And I think it was labeled in one bucket that, this does not have commercial value. I think now content is kind of progressing from there. People are not really putting it in one bucket and saying this does not have commercial value. I think now people are realizing that different audience is watching different content, and it's the content that really is, in the real sense, king, which while we've been saying it for years, but I think now people are realizing that. Outside we were discussing content like Veeredi Wedding, which, in few years from now, from now would have not done as well, because people, would have not given it the chance. Or even content like Made in Heaven would have really not seen the audience that it's seeing. And it just shows that there is a huge need gap that exists or that existed out there. Now with all the platforms coming in, data becoming cheaper, tier 3, tier 4 cities having smartphone, I think all of that is giving birth to, and for content creators to recognize that there's a huge need gap, and acquisition heads are seeing that and acquiring that. Creators are making that kind of content. So I think the wave is really going in that direction where the need has always existed, and that's what I said outside, and I will still say it. The need was always there. I think now is when the creators and different platforms are kind of taking notice of that need and not just going after what is commercial or
Right.
what is seemingly commercial.
Right, right. No, Kranti, since we are talking about content creation, if you know, while a lot of content is being created, which is perhaps interesting at that moment, but if you remember, in yesteryears there were movies and which were created, which are still loved by people, even after about half a century, people still love those movies, and those. Perhaps that content is not relevant from a social standing point of view because India has moved and for 50 years hence, right? But still people love to watch those movies. Are we seeing that kind of content being created which people will love to see even 20 years, 25 years, 30 years down the line? At least in the case of music, we are not seeing that happening. People are getting off the favorite song 6 months later. But when it comes to content which is viewed, do you see that?
I'll just actually like to take a step back to, actually what really the digital medium has done. I think what it has done is it's made the market more addressable. When I say more addressable, it means in a couple of ways. Number one is that we're now a large enough number, so we have over 300 million video viewers in India. Therefore, a deep enough, both in terms of social strata and wide enough in terms of geography and going down to the smaller regions, all have enough mass of heavy digital video consumers. It's also become a more one-on-one addressable market versus one-to-many. When it is one-to-many in terms of theaters or television, I have to address the lowest common denominator to get the most ROI on my content. But now, when it's one-on-one addressable, I can customize it for any group of people. So, for example, what Amazon is doing is addressing a certain kind of consumer and making great content which, talks to that content consumer. But someone like Amit Badana on YouTube is talking to a completely different set of consumers and finding a large enough addressable base for those kind of consumers. And, that's what our strategy has also been in terms of, going either regional or going to niche categories like devotion, or like coming back to your question now, whether content is getting made which will resonate 20 years later. I think now the freedom to create is so much more because even a smaller, something which was considered niche or would not have found market on a television, like the kind of shows Amazon is creating, would not have found enough TRPs, to keep it going without the Saas Bahu drama on television. But you're getting a lot of audience who's watching it and willing to, be loyal to the platform. So I think when there is freedom to create, you will create content which will resonate for a longer period of time. We may not be able to pick the gems right away. And also the gems will be, spread across such diverse categories that it may not always be as obvious as a Sholay. But I would say that the digital revolution definitely has given a massive boost to the creative community, and we'll definitely see the returns.
Right, right. Dhimant, I wanted to ask you slightly a 10,000 feet perspective question since we are talking about content creation in the digital era. You want to get into that space, with your characters, with your the characters that you have created. Why digital only? Is there a certain reason why you want to go after digital? Is that a space which is perhaps I don't know, is it cost effective than any other space that you think?
Yeah, so I'll take a step back and answer your first question first. If you look at the cost of telecom operator to buy data today, or if you look at the screen size appropriateness to watch content, it's completely democratized. I think it's fantastic to see that the monitor has become so portable that you can carry your own TV content or your own content of your choice at your price, at your time. You don't have to go to a theater. You don't have to sit at home. And that's what really is the magic. Now, we are a physical format. We are a theme park, completely different. And we felt that even on advertising or to take content in, mobile has become such an indispensable part of our life that if we don't look at digital today, when will we look at it, right? It's actually the perfect time for the ecosystem that has come into play, and it actually validates the old adage, choices fuel demand. So for someone like us, it's really important that India, where the character affinity has been more international and not really national, so we feel that it's important that to address this audience, to give local content, local characters in Hindi, in regional languages, very, very affable characters, and digital we think is the most cost effective, as well as from ability to turn around, we could be much faster.
Right, right. And so when you talk about the cost thing, what is the difference? Have you mapped that?
Well, I think first of all, to get a television partner on board and to get broadcasting acted upon itself is such a large entry barrier, and especially we are not Disneys or Universals of the world where there is a logical organic demand. So for us to break that benchmark itself is larger, and therefore digital becomes, it's typically how Angry Birds came into play. Angry Birds was a great example. It started with a digital game and went on to become a great character brand or a great brand in itself. That's something which we think is a great aspiration and a model for us.
Right. Uday, you come from a big brand. Can you find ways to solve the cost problem that is there? And because of that cost problem, a lot of creators are perhaps not able to create the desirable content, at least the content that they think is desirable.
So I think it's important to understand the stage at which the industry is right now, and I think we're all grappling with and I've been in this business now for about 5-6 years, and I'm trying to figure out where does one, how long will this investment phase continue, and I think that's the piece that is a challenge for all of us. How much do we invest? And how long do we have to wait for the returns to come in? And I think there's no easy answer. Therefore, each company, each organization will have to look at what works for them, what kind of costs are doable. I think the route to take would be to partner with other brands, work together with other platforms, and see what's the best way to reach scale. I don't think everybody today should get into a direct-to-consumer business. I think beyond a point, too many people getting into the direct-to-consumer business will become more and more expensive for people. It is an attractive business to get into. It looks very, very attractive. Once you're in it, yes, there is scale in it, there is size in it, and all of us have seen how big our consumer base are. We're running 70, 80 million users a month. There are people in this country who are running 100, 150 million users a month. So I'm saying this is a fairly large customer base, but it takes 5 to 8 years to reach that scale.
Right.
So my suggestion to people would be you have to decide what your business model is. You want to be a B2C brand, therefore your investments are of a different scale. You want to be a B2B2C brand, therefore your model, your strategy will have to be different. And I think that's the best way to solve for an entry barrier or a cost to consumer kind of a challenge.
Right. Vibha, you're taking a lot of the content that is being created in India to international markets. Has it become much more easy to do that because of digital? And what is the kind of acceptance you are seeing of Indian cinema, Indian entertainment in international markets?
Of course, it has become easier because of digital, and I think the reason for that is that people outside of India are now getting exposed to Indian content, not just through theaters, which was the primary means, or television, which was limited to the diaspora audience. Now, I think because of digital, people are getting to consume Indian movies, shows, and of course, therefore, the appetite for Indian content has also increased. Now they're not just looking at one film in, 1 year, now probably every single film that releases in India, or I want to say 70% films that do release in India are able to release outside of India. And sometimes we'll get queries from territories that we've not even, that were not even in our scheme of things, because they either saw that film or they heard about it or they read about the storyline. So I think the demand for Indian cinema is increasing. A lot of that also is thanks to markets that were closed markets and now are opening up. Markets like Japan, markets like Russia, a big one like China. So a film, when an Indian film does really well there, it really reaches, that news per se reaches the world. So I think that also opens up the world to Indian cinema a little bit more and saying, were we missing out on something? So I think, yes, it has, and also our numbers do prove that as well. I think about 10 years back, if my stats are correct, Bollywood films were, international was contributing to maybe less than a 1/5 of the overall box office revenue of the Indian market. And now there are films that are contributing slightly more or maybe half of what India does. So I think, yes, the demand has gone up, and hopefully, more markets definitely have opened up and are opening up as we speak.
Right. Uday, you want to?
So I think the huge difference that digital brings for any content, whether it's film or television or new stuff being created now. I'm saying anything that we are making in India, I think what digital brings is fantastic distribution across the world. You don't need to go to each market. You don't physically need to be in each market and distribute your product to that particular area. That basically makes your content globally available with one click. So if you can create platforms which are global, which have international appeal, has payment systems across the world, and you have the ability now with Apple and Google to be able to pay across the world, and your credit card systems work across. I think fundamentally there is very little entry barrier across the world now for people making content in India. And I think this is a huge disruption which digital is bringing, or a huge opportunity for content creators. All of a sudden, you can be in front of the entire global audience and an international Indian audience by one publishing platform. So if you partner with one or two publishing platforms, you can fundamentally reach your piece of content across the world. And that's a huge opportunity and a disruption caused by digital.
Right. Yeah, Aparna.
I just want to bring some creative color to this discourse. I also feel that because the stories that are being told now are so local, are so entrenched in our soil that it has a universal appeal. So I very strongly believe that the more local our stories, the more global they go. They're no longer being looked upon as packages, or a formulaic. So there are new voices, very independent thinking that's coming, and I think that is what is resonating internationally.
Right. So at a time, cinema, at least popular commercial cinema, was all about big stars. But let's take a step back. And Amazon was born in the internet, right? For a platform like yours, which has always tried to bring, whether it be it merchants or whether it's content creators or anybody who are not so big to the forefront, for you, is there a different lens of seeing how content is created or how stars are looked at? Is there a different lens to that completely?
I mean, it's really the creative lens. For us, everything begins from a great story. So I don't encourage conversations around, we have these actors and this director will come in. Nothing, it's what is the story really? If there's a great story, then we'd be able to attract the right talent to put it on screen. If there's a great story in the hands of a great storyteller, well, we have a winner on our hands. So, yeah.
So is the director very important?
This is a writer's medium.
Okay.
So, you can have multiple directors for a series. For instance, Made in Heaven had 4 directors. It's really the writing and the showrunner.
Doesn't it conflict?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
It doesn't. If you have a great story on paper, and if you find the right people to translate it on screen, and it could be multiple people, then you have a great show on screen.
Right. But in my case, I don't ever say anything to my boss sitting right there, Alokesh. I've never gone in conflict. I do whatever he tells me to do. So, but anyway, cutting that short, Kranti, so there has been a certain segmentation that that we are talking about. So, different kind of content appealing to different kind of viewers or listeners, right? Does it change life at Shemaru to a certain extent? Are you looking at content from various lenses now?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we have a very, very segmented approach. Even if you look at our OTT platform, Shemaru Me, we are one of the only few platforms who actually sell packs based on genres. So if you like, for example, devotion, you could only pick up a devotional pack. Or if you like classics, you could only pick a classic pack. We also believe that, the consumer is not a movie consumer or a show consumer. So it's like, just to give you an example, in classics, the consumer doesn't say that, oh, I like classic movies. So, let's take him to a section which is movies. We actually have a section called classics, which has classic movies, classic TV shows like Ye Jo Hai Zindagi, etc. Like we have classic, created a lot of ancillary content around classics like interview shows, biographies, documentaries, maybe over 100 hours of peripheral content, which is doing phenomenally well. And we have a whole library of songs over there, over 7,000 classic songs over there. We've also taken it one step further, and we actually have, not on our app, but as a genre for classic, what we do is we also have merchandise around classics. So we have, in fact, a booth here. We do a lot of merchandising, licensing, including, apparels, drinkware. You won't believe it, beer mugs with dialogues from classic movies sell like hotcakes. We've also now, in fact, are experimenting with a cloud kitchen. We've started in 2 geographies in Bombay with, a cloud kitchen where you have a Bollywood-themed meal that you can order to your place. So we're looking at the 360 degree of the genre for each segment of the consumer. Similarly, for devotion, if I were to say, we do, right from a service where you can order prasad or order a puja online to doing the Rath Yatra, 4 days back, which got crazy amount of response. So it's a 360 degree, whichever genre of content we do a 360 degree on it. And, we address the consumer, because that's the other thing with digital consumers. They are not only consuming video content. They're consuming memes. They're consuming, they are on a TikTok or a Vigo or a Hello. They are also buying stuff. They are consuming the genre in a holistic way versus just being a consumer of video content. And you need to be able to serve him. And one plays the other. So, a merchandise which does really well, a classic merchandise introduces a younger audience to an older film. And the guy may be interested in watching the film the next time it's, available to him. So I think cross-pollination and doing a 360 degree around the consumer's life is something that we believe in strongly.
Right. Dimant, you have also created a lot of, so characters to me seem to be the hub, and we have created various business extensions around your characters, like merchandise and everything, right? So what are your views on that? So is it something which is important in today's generation because you want to perhaps create multiple revenue models around content? Is that the reason why?
So revenue, of course, who would say no to? But most important is to take your brand beyond park. And merchandise, if you look at worldwide, almost 30-35% of revenues of Disney's come from merchandise. But more than that, it penetrates every household. When there is a reminder of the character you love in form of a physical product that you use functionally or as a memorabilia, it makes huge sense to keep. And we really think that that's very important element. In fact, we house what Kranti just said at Imagica. And the kind of affinity that we see, is phenomenal. We also have Mr. India content recreated in an animated sequel. And fantastic response. It actually resonates to the younger audience, although it was almost 30 years ago. But what happens today when a young audience looks at it, it's just brilliant. So merchandise is very, very essential, and making it functionally usable is very, very important. Unlike abroad where you would only keep it on a refrigerator as a souvenir, Indians look for functionality. And moment you offer that, it's a great combination.
Right, right. Now, Uday, tell me something about the fact that as you penetrate India deeper, culture suddenly has a huge impact on the kind of viewing. How do you address that in a digital genre? Is that something that you need to keep in mind while creating the content?
Yeah, I think actually digital is best suited for fragmented viewing and one-on-one viewing, and I think as the consumption of content and as the penetration of this whole digital consumption story goes deeper into India, we will probably see more and more pockets of consumption and cultural pockets come through. And I think it's visible from a lot of our creative stories that we are trying to now work on. We are looking at what we can do in the Telugu market, in the Tamil market, and the minute you get into some of those markets, the cultural aspects are so strong, and the storytelling from within a region are so different. And you know, culturally, each of these states is probably another 4 or 5 cultures, subcultures within them. And each subculture has a story or characters or mythologies or heroes in each one of those areas. And I think what is happening with each of these places becoming sizable in chunk, it's now becoming viable for platforms like us to go and tell stories to that market. I mean, we recently did something for the UP market, for Lucknow, and you know, we did a show along with TVF, which was, you know, which was very close to that space. Now, it's not something that a lot of people in Bombay would like or metros would like, but it was very close to the conversation in that market. And therefore, I think more and more new content that's going to be made will have to be made with the cultural anchor in it, and with the kind of language that area is using, the kind of stories that area understands. And I think there is a movement which will be on that side. There's also a trend of saying, can we still tell larger stories which everybody across the country will understand, which are of, which are storytelling which most of India will understand. And I think we will see both of them, but as languages become important, as regions become important, as those regions and languages become larger in size, our storytelling will have to take cognizance of what they want to see, what they want to hear.
Right. So Aparna, Mirzapur is perhaps one classic example of how a very local content was appealed to a larger nation, right? Perhaps out of the nation also. But do you see that? Do you see more of such examples inside Amazon's stable, or do you see Amazon also going deeper into the country where it creates content originals, Amazon Prime originals, which appeal to a very small pocket of viewers?
So, you know, we have a wide spectrum of content on our service. We have films in, 9 languages. We have user interface in 4 languages now: English, Hindi, Tamil, Telugu. And every piece of content that we create, we want it to resonate with as many people, and really transcend all boundaries of nationality, ethnicity, language, culture. Having said that, I completely agree with Mr. Sodhi. The South markets, in fact, all of our, other markets are very evolved markets. And films were a great way for us to test and learn the preferences, of the audiences. And having done that, we are now going really big in these markets. We are trying to create stories in every language, starting with Tamil and Telugu.
Interesting. Vibha, you look at the international market. Do you how while we're talking about going really local, deeper into the country to create content which is relevant to those areas and perhaps those states, but do you see people coming to you and talking about content that they want to create for large countries, say a content which will be which would which would be relevant for say a Russia or a China or say a South Africa or Europe?
I want to actually take one step backwards on this. Aparna said this a while back that, while it's actually the story that travels, right? Sometimes a rooted content can actually be very universal. So when you see a recent example of Article 15, while we were discussing, in a big debate that will it work internationally or not, because this is a subject that they really have they've never dealt with it, they don't know what it is, they probably have heard of something like this happening in India. And even for people, in metros, they're kind of alienated with a subject like this. But not just in India, but outside of India also, somehow it's really resonated with them. Whether you talk about a Hindi medium, which is again very rooted within India, it really resonates with an international market. So I don't quite agree with writers or creators who will come and say that we want to create a concept for a wider audience, because I think if your story is true to what you're trying to say, it will have a universal appeal. I know the show that he's talking about, and I think the fact that that show is so real, it appeals to somebody who lives in a Bombay or maybe somebody who lives in New York. So I think as long as you can be true to your story rather than trying to say, and I've heard directors and creators say, I want to make a film for China. I don't think it really works like that. You make a good story that everybody wants to watch and it will travel. And if you see some of our unconventional, very rooted films like Hindi mediums, Secret Superstar, Dangal, Mom, they were not made for Chinese audience, or even Andhadhun. I don't think it was even made for the Indian audience, but I don't think they were made for an audience. They were stories that the writers, the directors wanted to tell. And because they told it so beautifully, I think it just found a wider universe.
So are these Indians living in those countries, or
I'm actually not talking about the diaspora audience. I'm talking about an audience that does not speak the language, that does not understand the language. And that's also a trend that we're seeing with the regional content outside of India. So, while we talk about Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam films, in fact, these films outside of India do either equal business or better business than India. That's because outside of India, they're not looking at the language, they're not looking at what color of the skin, what language it's spoken. It's the story that you're trying to tell me. Do I like what I'm seeing on screen, or do I not like what I'm seeing on screen? Whether it has a big star or not. I mean, Irfan was not a big star in China or in other markets, even when Lunchbox came. But I think people enjoyed the story and they wanted to watch that story. And I think it really, really just boils down to that.
Right. So with that, I would ask my last question, and that question is for all of you. So one by one, I'll go. So the topic of today's discussion was creating entertainment for the digital generation. What do you think, Nimant, is that one big opportunity and one big challenge in doing so?
I think the opportunity really lies in storytelling, wherein which the great writers or the writers get a fantastic platform to express themselves. Really speaking, if like Vibha said, if you don't keep China in mind to create content for China. I'm sure Chinese can make better content for themselves than Indians can, logically. So I think it's a great platform for them. And great opportunity really lies there. In terms of challenges and difficulties, I would think it's about how well your sustenance capacities and how quickly you can turn around content, so to speak. It's technically become a T20 from test match, is how I would simply put it, yeah.
Uday?
So the opportunity is huge, and today we are about 320 odd million users who are watching digital video on their mobiles or any digital device. Reports say that this could go to about 600 odd million in the next 3 to 4 years. So I think the business in terms of sheer number of people who can consume this content would probably double. Plus, if you take a factor of how much time spent is increasing, this number could be more than 2-3x of where we are currently sitting. So there is a huge opportunity out there in terms of consumption, in terms of being able to tell stories, in terms of being able to make sure that there are enough audiences across the country. 600 million will make us probably one of the largest markets in the world just after China. So I think there's fair amount of opportunity out there. The real challenge for all of us is going to be, are we going to be able to create good content for our users? Are we going to have content, after the initial buzz and the excitement of this space, things will tend to settle down. And I think it's important as leaders in this content business to ensure that we stay true to our consumers, tell good stories, make it viable in the long run for the users to consume this and keep this as an alternate medium of consumption. And I think the small screen or the big screen, whichever digital screen you're consuming content, can you make a huge difference for the consumer, difference to their lives by giving them entertainment on the go? I think that would be a huge thing. For the industry, can we create a great pool of talent for this entire industry that's getting created? This whole digital entertainment industry is a huge industry being created. Can we create a great talent pool for this industry? Is a huge, huge challenge. I think a lot of people still relate themselves to television or to films, but is there an industry that we can create is a challenge.
Right. Vibha?
I think our opportunity and challenge both are our diversity. We're such a diverse nation, and I think in terms of creating content for us, we've really not even scratched, like I said before, tip of the iceberg. So I think it's how we really create content for the entire diversity, and I don't just mean Punjabi, Telugu, Tamil. I also mean tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities, right? When we're talking about a lot of the digital content, we really are talking about tier 1, tier 2, but I was reading somewhere 50% of the consumption of digital content is really happening in tier 3, tier 4 cities. That's where 50% of our content consumption is coming from. So like I said, I really think that's a huge, huge opportunity for us, and the huge challenge is how content creators are actually going to create such a diverse content that really goes deeper into this diversity.
Right.
I think there's never been a better time for content creators and the audience. These are amazing times for storytellers, writers, directors, actors, other technicians. The kind of work that's happening now, I don't think it's ever happened before. I mean, it's heartening to see my 3.5-year-old niece and my 75-year-old father both watching content, on Amazon. It's very heartening. The challenge, again, I just say creatively, the biggest challenge that I face is that this is a new medium. This is a new craft. And, everyone's learning together, creating cinematic TV, which is compelling, which is limited, which will have a cliffhanger at the end of every episode. Something that you write in episode 1 may have a bearing in episode 5 of season 5. Creating that kind of a universe, it's a different ball game. It's a different task. And we're all learning together, bringing the discipline of getting returning seasons timely. So I think those are some of the challenges. But like I said, this is truly the renaissance of Indian entertainment.
Kranti?
So I'm going to address it from the business angle. She did the creative thing so beautifully. From a business angle, I think the massive opportunity, as Vibha said, lies in the non-metro, but still probably urban or even tier 1, tier 2 or the lower tier audiences. I think that's a massive under-addressed market. Television has never been able to do enough justice in terms of personalization over there. But I think discovery of content, educating such small pockets of people about new and newer brands of content. You know, every time you educate them about a brand of content, and it's just one season, and then you have to educate them about the next brand of content, and you know, versus a serial which comes every day at 7:30 p.m. appointment viewing for the next 2 years. So I think, you know, building loyalty to content brands, and because there's a massive amount of investment which goes in building that loyalty and discovery. So I think, and from a consumer point of view also, suddenly moving away from the comfort of, you know, appointment viewing to having to, you know, discover newer content or re-engage with the content every time. I think both of these would be challenges from a business point of view. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kranti. Thank you, Aparna. Thank you, Vibha. Thank you, thank you, Nimant. It was a lovely discussion. I got to learn a lot of new things, and hopefully we will see a lot of more entertaining, driving, and disrupting content coming out from various platforms. And as you said, that this is the renaissance of Indian entertainment. Hopefully, we'll see a lot more from everybody's table in the years to come. Thank you again for being with us.